Hey everybody, good morning. This is Krista. This is Bad at Keeping Secrets. And today I have the author of Sensitive, Jenn Granneman, here to talk about, we're going to start off with her secret. So this is going to be a juicy one. Not everybody shares a secret, but this is Bad at Keeping Secrets. And I originally started this because I am notoriously bad at keeping secrets. I think it boils down to having like bad boundaries and not knowing when I can share things. So basically, if you like don't want me to share things or something, you have to tell me before you tell me the secret. But anyway, you have a really good secret, and I feel like if you don't mind, let's start off there.
Okay, so I'm an introvert as well as a highly sensitive person. And the introvert in me secretly hates doing interviews.
Well, I mean, when you told me that earlier, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for having you here. But I also think,
And
uh,
I was like trying to reassure you, like, you don't have to feel bad. I feel comfortable. I just like would rather be in my pajamas right now and like working on my website or reading a book or just, like doing anything to not have to talk to anyone.
so
But I feel comfortable.
what does it feel like in your brain when, like for me, oftentimes, uh, there's different reactions I have to social situations. And how do you know you don't like it? Or what is it about how you're feeling internally right now that kind of makes you want to do something else?
I think now that we've gotten rolling, I feel okay. Like I'm excited to be having this conversation, but I'll be completely honest, like getting ready to do this, I just had this feeling of dread and like, oh, okay, here we go. Because it's like not that I don't think you're a lovely, wonderful person and not that I don't want to talk about what I'm talking about because I actually love to share the information that I'm talking about with people. But it's like that feeling, I think, with an interview or even, like, a new social situation, like a first date or, like, getting together with a friend you don't know very well yet. It's like you feel like you have to be on, right? You
Hmm.
have to socially be on, and you have to say the right things, and, when you're an introvert with already a limited social battery, that extra layer of, like, having to be on, that gets really draining.
Yeah, no, I think you put that really well. I think for me, I have like performance anxiety. This brings up that like for 2 days, I had to give a wedding speech recently.
Oh my
And for
gosh,
the
I would
two
die.
days before, I was just like, I couldn't enjoy anything. And then I
Oh,
totally
I've been there so many
the
times.
the speech went horribly, even though I prepared
Oh,
so
no.
much.
Oh.
Um, I just will never learn that I want to talk about like really specific inappropriate things at weddings, like the reason to get married and redefining what marriage is. And nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear funny stories about the couple. And I
Oh
just
my gosh.
am unwilling to deliver that.
That sounds like the kind of wedding speech I would plan. I would be like, "Let's delve into the history of marriage and why."
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
It is
Um,
fascinating. Oh my gosh, yeah.
but we're gonna talk a bit about sensitive. I have your book right here, Tangled in Cords. Um, and you co-wrote this book, and you start off the book a bit with a story about you and how you grew up in different places, but there was a thorough line of sensitivity. Can you talk a little bit about your growing up and kind of the first things, the ways in which you kind of felt like maybe you were more sensitive than other people?
Yeah, so I can remember just needing to come home at the end of a school day and just going into my room, closing the door, turning the lights down low, and just having to do something really relaxing, like reading a book or even just laying in my bed because I felt really tired and really drained. And it was just a normal school day. But just all that stimulation and all those people around me, it got to be really exhausting. And I felt really strange and different because of this, because I had a good group of friends and they, they were more extroverted than me. And I would also say they weren't highly sensitive people. And it was really easy for them to just get up and keep going and do more. So I always felt like this strange person for just needing to have that downtime.
So can we talk a little bit about, you talk about this earlier on in the book, the percentage of the population that is sensitive and sort of the thresholds on how you would know if you're a highly sensitive person.
Yeah, so about 30% of people are highly sensitive. And then there's a group of people who fall into the middle. So about 40% are what we would consider medium or average sensitive. And then the on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who would be considered not very sensitive at all. So there's a range and everyone's sensitive to some degree, but you might be a highly sensitive person if you think deeply about your experiences, if you have strong emotions, maybe you cry easily, maybe you feel tired like I do after just a, quote unquote normal day. Maybe you find yourself really deeply moved by art and beauty. I have a lot of memories of being at some sort of art exhibit or play and we all stand up and I'm crying and I look around and my friends are just like, well, that was cool, what do you want to get for dinner? And I'm just like, how are you not devastated by that? um but yeah, there's a lot of ways to know if you're a sensitive person. There's a checklist in my book.
Oh no, it's really great to go through and sort of think about these things because I think also I have the tendency, I think I am a highly sensitive person.
Okay.
Um, but and it became really apparent in reading the book and going through the checklist. Can you talk about the origins of the term highly sensitive person, where it came from? And uh, it was, I think, coined by Elaine Ahrens. Is that who it was?
Yeah. Yep. Dr. Elaine Aron, who is amazing, and I have so much respect for her and her work. She coined the term back in the 1990s, highly sensitive person. And, I think that's a good term. I like to simplify it and just say sensitive person.
Why do you like to shorten it? Sensitive person
You
versus
know,
highly.
yeah, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I guess I just like, efficiency, shorter things.
Mhm.
But that point aside, it was interesting when I was writing the book, people would ask me, what's your book about? And I would say, highly sensitive people. And there would be just a range of reactions to that term. Some people understood immediately what I was talking about. And they would be like, oh, that's me. That's great. I'm so excited to read your book. But most people had no idea what that term meant. And in fact, they thought it meant something completely different. So people would say things like, oh, thank goodness you're writing a book to tell people to stop being so sensitive and to toughen up because that's what our society, everyone's just overly sensitive in our society right now. People would use a phrase like snowflake, right? They thought it was maybe a political thing that I was writing about. So I think, sort of in an effort to move away from some of those misconceptions about sensitivity, I like to just drop that word highly. I also think that a better phrase completely might be responsive, because if you're a sensitive person, it just means that you're responsive to the world around you. And so yeah, I mean, we could have a debate about what to call it, but it's really just this trait about responding more to your environment and your emotions.
I think also in the beginning you talk a bit about sort of the stigmas around being labeled as sensitive, and I think the book itself is sort of the goal is to reframe and to talk about it, all of the different strengths that sensitive people have. Um, can you talk a little bit about why maybe there are stigmas or what your theory is around sensitivity being maybe a negative thing?
Right. So in our book, we call this the toughness myth. And the toughness myth is this idea that we have to toughen up and push through and just get over it. And that we should hide our sensitivity. And I think we live in a world that prizes people being able to just push through and be aggressive and be strong, right? We don't want to think about ourselves as having a vulnerable side or a sensitive side. I think a lot of misconceptions around sensitivity are that it's weak, or it's something that we need to fix, or it's something that we need to get over. I think a lot of people, if you're sensitive, you've heard the phrase, you're too sensitive at some point in your life, or you've been told, get over it or toughen up, right? That's often what I heard. Just get over it. Just move on. It's okay. And it's hard to hear those things.
I do you think that I mean, I don't know if this is obvious, but I assume that the people that are telling you those things or saying those things want the best for us. But can you maybe elaborate on maybe why those statements aren't helpful?
Yeah, I think they usually come from a well-intentioned place. I think it's something we say when we want someone to cheer up and feel better. But I think those aren't helpful because in some ways they're a form of gaslighting. They're saying that, you know, your perspective, your viewpoint aren't valid. No, you can't really be hurting that badly. No, you can't really be experiencing the world like that. No, the volume isn't too loud. No, the lights aren't too bright. No, you don't need to rest after a day at school. I think a lot of times people will do something hurtful. Maybe they'll make a hurtful joke. And then, when the other person gets offended or hurt, they might say, "Oh, you're just being too sensitive." And I don't like this because then it means the person who did the hurtful thing doesn't have to take responsibility for what they said or did. It shifts the blame and says, "You didn't have a right to feel hurt. It was your fault that you felt hurt, not mine."
I think that's really true. I think it mainly is for the person who is okay with the situation, or it makes them feel better. That
Right. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
the and less about the person who's actually being affected.
Yes.
Um, the other thing early on in the book that you talk about that I don't know why this wasn't more obvious to me was the connection between sensitivity, emotions, and being sensitive to one's environment, like
Mhm.
itchy sweaters. And
Mhm.
I was wondering if you could kind of talk about maybe why. I mean, I don't mean to assume that other people may not have coupled those two things, but maybe why I didn't associate extra sensitive being in multiple realms.
Y you know, you're not alone. A lot of people say, "Oh, I never thought about it that way." But yeah, a lot of sensitive people do experience some sensory discomfort. Personally, I find those bright overhead lights in a lot of stores or offices or classrooms to be really, really bothersome. I was a fourth grade teacher for a long time, so the lights, all the sounds, it is overstimulating sometimes. And other things can cause sensory discomforts. Like I said, loud noises. My son is 2, and I think he's a sensitive person. And it was funny to see him react to a siren going by. He got really upset, covered his ears, started crying when there was car going by with a police car with a siren. And the other kids who were his age were just like, "Oh, whatever, no big deal." Right. So it's just interesting to see that. We all have those different reactions. But
Uh,
oh, go ahead.
oh, I was going to selfishly ask you about sort of now that I know that you're a parent, I have a 3.5-year-old,
Oh my
and
gosh. Well,
uh,
we're in the same boat here.
I'm pretty sure that she is also a highly sensitive or a responsive person,
Okay. Yeah.
uh, for a multitude of reasons. But I think like going back to thinking about how I was raised, I think my earliest memory is being labeled as a sensitive person,
Oh,
um,
okay.
too
Interesting.
sensitive and too
Yeah.
reactive. And
Mhm.
I just want to do right by my kid. And I was wondering if I could ask you, what is your sort of way that you think about interacting with your son to kind of help him get comfortable with the ways that he understands the world?
Right. Yeah. So my son is interesting because he seems to be a sensitive person, but he also seems to be a very social and extroverted person. So he's a lot like me in some ways and then different from me in other ways. And I try to see his sensitivity as a positive thing. And that's not always easy, right? When he's like um crying because of a siren and other kids are fine, or there's just certain textures he won't eat. And I know some of that is normal for his age, but there definitely is some extra sensitivity with him beyond just being a toddler. So I want to see his sensitivity as a superpower. And my hope is that by me seeing it that way, that he will also come to see it that way himself.
I think, is it fair to assume, were you also labeled a sensitive child as well?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
How,
I was labeled all kinds of things: shy, sensitive, uh, anxious, nervous, right? Like, I think adults often don't have the words, to describe what's happening with their children. So it's, so yeah, all kinds of labels were tossed at me.
do you think that, so I think in the book, there's, I think a couple papers that you cite from Annie Murphy Paul about the development in utero, the 9 months before you're born and experiencing trauma, and how that might sort of alter our genetic makeup. Can you talk a little bit about, do you remember what paper I'm referencing?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a big topic, but it's one that's really interesting to me. So we're talking about how a person becomes sensitive. And we don't have all the answers to that question, but scientists believe that sensitive people are probably born that way. You're probably born with a set of genes that makes you more sensitive to your environment. They call them plasticity genes, and that just means you are more easily shaped by your world, which I think is so interesting. And then there are other factors that determine how sensitive you are. So what you're referring to is epigenetics, which, again, we still don't have all the answers. We're still learning about all of this stuff. But scientists think that maybe if your mom experienced some sort of traumatic event, maybe 9/11, maybe COVID or whatever, maybe a war or some sort of crisis, that maybe you would be born a little more sensitive. And I should say, if your mom experienced that event while she was pregnant with you. And scientists think it might be a way of evolution sending a message to that baby in the womb and saying, hey, pay attention. It is a wild world out here. So babies might be born a little more sensitive. There are other things that influence your level of sensitivity. So scientists have found that if you were raised in an extreme environment, either one that was abusive or one that was very enriching, you might have become a little more sensitive as a result. And if you think about it, it makes sense because if you are, unfortunately in an abusive or neglectful environment, it benefits you to become more sensitive because you can pay attention to your caregivers. You can notice their moods. You can notice the slightest shift in their behavior as a protective mechanism, or you're just more in tune to threats in your environment. But then on the other end, if you are raised in an enriching environment, your body might become more sensitive as a way to soak up all the benefit, to sort of get every last drop of benefit out of your enriching environment.
You touched a little bit on this while you were speaking a moment ago, but can you talk a little bit about the effects of sensitivity in in regards to human connection and connecting with other people, and
Mm.
how it one of the benefits of potentially being an empathetic person might be?
Yeah. So sensitive people have high levels of empathy. Scientists can actually see this on brain scans. There are areas of the brain in the sensitive person that just light up more and get more activated, areas related to empathy. So, we go into the world with this natural empathy, which can be amazing, right? I mean, when you have empathy, you can put yourself in someone else's shoes. You can connect with them more easily. I like to say that highly sensitive people are natural connectors. We just have this drive to connect and create intimacy with other people. And so that can be incredible. It can make us great friends, great partners, great leaders, great parents, right? I mean, you need a lot of empathy when your 2 or 3 year old is throwing a tantrum at 3 a.m., which has happened to me recently. But yeah, so it's empathy it can be hard when you go into the world with this open heart, but it can also be an incredible gift.
I love that, going into this world with an open heart. Do you have any theories on why why it might be that the population breakdown, the 30% being sensitive, 40% being in the middle, and kind of then everybody else being less sensitive, why we would have co-evolved.
Yeah, so scientists think that sensitivity evolved as a protective mechanism. They think it evolved to literally help keep our species alive. And humans aren't the only ones who show sensitivity. The trait has been found in about 100 other species, including cats, dogs, fish, um, monkeys. Lots of animals have this trait. So in every species, there's this set of people that are more sensitive than the rest of the people. And if you think about it, again, that makes sense from an evolutionary perspective because sensitive people can hear that faint rustling in the bushes. That might be a tiger about to attack, or maybe they remember where resources are, like food and water, and how to get back to those resources. So, if you're in tune to your environment, obviously that is going to help you and the group of people that you're with survive better. Now, we don't need everyone to be sensitive, right? Sometimes it benefits us to be less sensitive, right? Like maybe think of an extreme situation or a really harsh environment. It might be beneficial to not soak up everything in your environment, right? So, evolution is essentially saying we've got some people who are going to be really sensitive and some people who are going to be not very sensitive. And both of those groups of people are increasing the odds that this whole species will continue to survive and thrive.
But I don't know if you talk about this expressly in the book, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how technology was changing our sensitivities.
Oh, yeah. We just kind of like very briefly touch on that at the beginning of the book, but we are just so bombarded with so much information all the time. Um, you know, um, I'm forgetting the number that we quoted in the book, but I remember typing it out and it had a lot of zeros. But right, we're exposed to just like a huge amount of information every day, way more than anyone in past generations, right? There's social media, there's email, there's Netflix, there's so much coming at our brains all the time. And I think that amount of information is overstimulating for anyone, even if they're not sensitive. But if you're a sensitive person, it hits you harder because we get overstimulated more easily. So yeah, I often just sort of find myself being in this like notifications fatigue or like information fatigue, right? Because it's just like, oh man, it's just technology gives us so much that we have to take in every day.
Uh, I think I think it's Virginia Heffernan in Magic and Lost. Do you know that book?
Mm-mm.
She talks about she writes for Wired, but she talks about how our five senses are changing in that we're losing touch and
Oh,
we're losing smell with
oh, that's so interesting.
the heightening of, I think, sound and vision
Mm.
because of technology. And it's fun, not maybe fun is not the right word, but to think about I can feel certain senses. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or if it's because I
Mm.
spend too much time on technology. Uh, I can feel my spectrum of sensation changing, if that makes sense.
Mm. Mm, mhm, mhm.
Um, and also, I think I've been more, I think I remember from the book, she talks a little bit about like hairy, sweaty surfaces being just humans having an aversion to them more so because tech is clean and
Oh,
soft and not soft. They're like different, I don't know, different ways that tech is sort of,
figuratively soft in a way. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's wow. Yeah. Okay. Now that sounds like a great wedding speech. Our sense of touch is going away.
Well,
I'm ready to give that speech. That's
I mean,
fascinating.
it's tricky to think about how we're sort of evolving along with the technology that
Mhm.
we're creating. And I would
Ooh,
assume that
spooky a
our
little.
sense of I definitely think it's really spooky. Do you think that at what age, and again, this is not what your book is about, but um
Go for it.
how
I'll
do
do my best.
uh, Do you think that you'll let your child have, or what's your feelings on like tech and raising kids and maybe being sensitive to what their needs are, or how tech is changing their brains?
Yeah, I can't say I've actually thought that through very well because my kiddo he's not even 2.5. So, he doesn't have a phone. We don't have an iPad. I let him watch his little cartoons on Netflix. He's got all those little cartoons that he likes. But I do try to limit that time. Um, yeah, I'm gonna have to think about that as we go. I think I probably will have, a desire to limit it in some way. I guess I just don't know what that looks like yet.
I think I asked this because so my daughter has cystic fibrosis, and so we do these like
Oh.
really intense treatments twice a day.
Mhm.
And if we didn't have an iPad where she could like, I
Oh,
don't know what
yeah.
people did
Yeah.
in previous generations to like get their kids to sit through long medical stuff that you like can't really explain why we're having to do this, but we have to do it kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, I
And
am not opposed to that stuff at all. I mean, I put, Coco Melon on my TV when I
oh,
have to
Coco
make
Melon
dinner,
is
right?
magic.
Yes. And at this point, my kiddo has watched Coco Melon on my phone so many times, he expects it now whenever we have to go to the doctor or, like sit in a waiting room for some reason. He's just like, "Coco Melon?" So, you gotta do what you gotta do.
I think I was thinking about this recently because I went to see The Little Mermaid, and it was everybody was like, "Oh, you should bring your daughter to it." And I was like, "There's no way Margaret had would have a 3 hour attention span. Like
Right.
her attention span is 30 seconds,
Yes, yes.
and it's because of the iPad. I think. Or, I mean, I guess I don't know necessarily because I don't study childhood brain development, but
I don't
it's just
either, but
fascinating.
I think it is somewhat, age appropriate to have a short attention span at this point, but yeah, no, I my kid's the same way.
Do you have just one child?
Mhm. Yep.
Oh,
About
two.
you?
I feel like twos, I know that they were like, oh, twos are really hard, but two for us was really easy, and has been really, really intense.
Okay, okay,
We just have one kid,
okay.
who I adore, but I think right now we have just had like it's kind of almost the big emotions show up whenever I'm like least expecting it, and it just like is it's pretty intense. But
Ooh, those big
um
emotions they are hard. They are hard. Yep. Mhm.
So I think something we didn't talk about that I think is um, maybe something that people might be interested because I'm interested in the sort of gender expectations for different uh, how sensitivity shows up. Um, if you could kind of talk a little bit about how they're noticed like early on in life.
Yeah, so both men and women are sensitive in equal numbers. A lot of times we associate sensitivity with, femininity, and that's not true. Men and women are equally sensitive. But I think because of this toughness myth that men are often discouraged from being sensitive, it's seen as a weakness. There's an interesting study that Elaine Aron did, and she gave young boys the scale for the highly sensitive person. So basically, a test to determine if you're a sensitive person or not. And those boys, scored as she was expected. There was, a good number of boys who were indeed sensitive. And then years later, she gave those same boys that same test. And interestingly, when they were teenagers, they did not score as sensitive people. And she thought, well, it's not like they changed, right? Sensitivity is probably something we're born with. We'll probably always be sensitive for our whole lives. Well, what's going on? Well, she theorizes that those boys still were sensitive, but by the time they were teenagers, they didn't want to be seen as sensitive. They hid their sensitivity. It wasn't cool to be sensitive, right? So they were just not honest on the test and didn't want to be seen that way. And I think that's really telling because I think a lot of men do feel that need to hide their sensitivity because it can be seen as something vulnerable or weak.
What do you see? Are we doing different things in classrooms now growing up to maybe, or is there curriculum around sort of reframing being sensitive, to be more inclusive and accepting and also affirming?
I think we are making good strides in classrooms. I was a fourth grade teacher for about 8 years, and there is a lot of progress just around mental health and psychology in general, but it's really hit and miss. As far as I've seen, there isn't some sort of widely used curriculum that talks about personality or sensitivity or mental health. There are some awesome individual teachers who take that on themselves. I knew an art teacher when I was teaching who did a unit about introversion and extroversion. And the kids took a test, and I think they were third graders. They took a test and determined if they were an introvert or an extrovert, and then they made an art project to reflect that. But again, it's just there isn't something that's widely being used, which is a shame. It's something I would like to change. It's just really kind of up to individual teachers right now to talk about these things.
There is also in the book you talked a bit about how genes and culture play a role in depression. I think it was the depression map.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of mental health and the overlaps with being a really responsive person, to use
Right.
your term?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're a sensitive person, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be depressed or have anxiety or have any other mental health condition. But what we have seen is that it is more common for sensitive people to struggle with depression or anxiety because, well, we react more to the world around us. So if there are bad things happening in your world, it might be a little easier for you to feel anxious or depressed about them. I mean, personally, I've dealt with anxiety and depression my entire life. And, the flip side of that is that you also react to good things more. So we call this the sensitive boost effect. And that is the idea that basic supports like therapy or self care or journaling or good, strong relationships, those things will go further for you as a sensitive person because you're going to get more out of them. So it's this trait that can be tricky, right? You get hit harder by the bad things, but you also get more of a boost from the good things.
I think this is also another thing, kind of when we started off our interview, talking a bit about how you didn't want to do this interview, or that you weren't. I think that in the
I
past,
now that I'm warmed up, I am having fun now, just so you know.
oh, okay.
I feel bad,
But
like, I feel bad that I said that to you, that I was, like, dreading this interview, but
oh no,
I'm having a great time.
but I think it's kind of cool that you were able to say that, because I think in the past, if I were feeling that way, which I definitely have pretty intense social anxiety, that
I
like
get
ebbs
that.
and flows, and the fact that you can be open with it and talk about it, and like it's understandable between us, like two humans, that one would feel that way, and you can't really control. I mean, obviously, we can't control our feelings and emotions. So I think that in itself is sort of like, um, I don't know, illustrative of the destigmatization of kind of talking about our more, I don't know, complex emotional states, I guess. But I think the other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of like raising a sensitive generation, there's also our stereotypes. I think I can't remember the author you quoted on being a Black sensitive woman, and sort of the how I also wanted to kind of touch on how race plays into our assumptions of how one should be.
Yeah, so I quoted, her name is Rainisha Price. She's a lawyer and a writer, and she's a highly sensitive person. And she told a story about how when she was young, she was called a racial slur, and it really bothered her. So she talked to her dad, and her dad just essentially said, shake it off, get over it, and be confident, don't let Don't let the other person see that it hurts you. And that was sort of, that event was sort of indicative of a lot of things she experienced in her life, that she wasn't supposed to let people see when she was hurt. She had to present this strong, confident front in the face of racism or other hardships. And I think if you are someone who is in one of those minority groups, it can feel almost harder to accept your sensitivity because it's sort of like a double condition, right? That's put on you. And there's this idea that, as a Black person, you need to be strong. You need to be confident. You can't show that vulnerable side. And I think that can be really hard. And I hope that's something that can change.
I think there's something about two women in complicity or wanting us to not, I don't know, to blend in with the background. And then when I think
Mhm.
you have strong opinions, which I think being sensitive may sort of, I don't know, yield strong opinions or because of the sense or extrasensory information that you're getting. I think that could be, I don't know. I feel like in certain situations when I speak up, it's really difficult, and I can't imagine for lots of members of the population. I'm incredibly privileged to be able to feel comfortable speaking up. Um, I also think that, like, for me, growing up, being sensitive, having sensitivities, it wasn't necessarily negative or positive, but I do think my feelings were taken seriously
Mm,
always, um,
that's great.
which which I think is interesting. My mother also identifies as an HSP, so
Mhm.
I
That
think she
helps.
was like, I can see it in you. Um, you're 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 following in my footsteps in ways that
Well, there you go.
I
It is
didn't
genetic.
intend.
So it makes sense.
You talk also in the book, there are 3 different types of sensitivity. Can you kinda talk us through those?
Yeah. So this is the idea that we're all sensitive in different ways. And you might have, one particular area that you're sensitive in, or maybe you're sensitive in all three areas. So the first way is that you are a super sensor, or in other words, someone who is more in tune with your environment on a physical level. So you might be sensitive to sounds or bright lights or a scratchy sweater or certain tastes or smells. And then the next one is that you are a super feeler. And this has to do with emotions. And that is both your own emotions and other people's emotions, right? Because if you're a sensitive person, a lot of times you are absorbing other people's emotions, or other people's emotions can really impact your own mood for good or for bad, right? If someone is happy and excited, you catch that happiness, but if they're stressed out, you also catch that stress. And of course, everybody, all humans catch emotions from one another. It's just the way we're wired, but of course sensitive people do this to a greater degree. And then the last type of sensitivity is that you are someone who is very in tune to artistic details. So you notice beauty, you notice art, you are very in tune with like a fine wine or a delicate taste. Maybe you're a foodie. Or maybe you're a creative person, maybe you're an artist or a writer. But you are an aesthete, so you are very in tune with those artistic details.
I thought that that was a really fun way to think about all the sort of the different ways in which one could be sensitive. I noticed you use the term attuned. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that means in terms of emotional attunement, because I feel like
Yeah.
I've been using it a lot lately along with alignment.
Mhm.
And I feel like there's something right now. I mean, like 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have used those terms.
Right, right. Yeah, I think sensitive people tend to be more attuned to other people's emotions, and they are also more attuned to their own emotions. So if you're attuned, you're noticing a micro expression on someone's face, just before it vanishes. Maybe you are reading someone really well. Maybe you seem to know what they're thinking or feeling, maybe even before they realize it themselves. I'm not saying that highly sensitive people are mind readers or psychics, but we do tend to be very attuned to other people. But I think it's tricky because sometimes we can become hyper attuned to other people. I think when I was in school, that was part of my exhaustion. I was hyper attuned to all the people in my classroom. And it wasn't just school, right? It was when I had an office job or when I'm out with a group of friends or whatever. I tend to be very, very tuned in to the people around me. And that can be great because again, it can be a superpower that allows you to connect well with others, but it can also get pretty exhausting when you're noticing all those little cues and emotions.
I never thought about it this way before having a child, but that part of the I don't know. It's not the burden of motherhood, but the joy burden of motherhood is
Right. It's
or of
both.
parenthood is in
Mhm.
some ways, I feel like I don't know if mothers were always emotionally responsible for all of the moods that their child
Mhm.
exhibited or experienced.
Mhm.
But I didn't realize until this that I was trying to be emotionally available for everyone in a room at all
Yes.
times,
Yes.
and take on their emotions. And then not only would I respond with, I mean, because I do think we all, I don't know how you feel about this statement, but feel free to disagree, that we all sort of slightly, going back to your attune ourselves to what we feel like the other person needs or
Mhm.
how they would like to be interacted with at all times.
Yes.
So having to do that in multiple directions for multiple people in one moment is really exhausting.
Yeah, it's so exhausting. And it's kind of amazing on some level. Like sensitive people are just always meeting other people the way that they would want to be met, the way that they would feel comfortable. I think it's an amazing superpower, but oh yeah, it gets so exhausting. Right? I mean, just imagine like walking into a social situation and just like only focusing on your own needs in the moment, right? Like I can't even imagine what that is like, but if I did it, I bet I would be less exhausted by the end of it.
Do you have any sort of things or not? I mean, self care is such a loaded term these days, but boundaries maybe is a better one that you put up for yourself or thresholds that you feel like you just don't cross? Because I mean, you crossed the threshold of doing this interview today, even though there was a certain amount of dread about it. Where do you know where that line is where you need to kind of stop or assert some sort of boundary for yourself to kind of maintain your sanity?
Yeah, that's a good question. And sometimes it can be hard to know, right? Sometimes you just have to push yourself and step out of your comfort zone. And then other times you do have to put a limit on something and put a boundary up. I think it's hard. I think it's on a situation by situation basis. But one boundary I have recently put into place is that I don't I don't accept last minute social plans.
Ooh,
So,
okay.
right? So, like and I should say with, like, an exception, right? Like, my good friend at the last minute was like, "Hey, my house is empty. Do you wanna come over later this afternoon? Just stop by and we can sit on my patio and chat." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great." But there's, like, a comfort level there with her. I'm also, like, dating right now, right? Which is, like, a whole thing. Right? Because I'm a single parent and I'm dating. So like there has to be a good boundary there about like, no, I can't just like change my plans today and meet you. Um, so yeah, that is that is a boundary that protects my energy. I want to know at least a day in advance before I make some sort of social plan. And once the plan is set for today, I'm not going to change it, with few exceptions.
When you again, you don't have to answer this. You don't have to answer any questions I ask you. But in
Oh,
terms
yeah,
of
go ahead.
dating,
We've
are you
already
look
gone, like, over we're there already.
in terms of dating, do you look for, should people who are HSPs or let's see, responsive people date other responsive people, or is that a potentially situation that would be not advisable?
I think it could be really good if you can find a mature partner who is a highly sensitive person. I think that would be amazing. I mean, I have gravitated toward other introverts and other highly sensitive people in my dating. Um, I have to say I've run into some introverts and highly sensitive people who, they're just sort of lacking consideration or, an emotional maturity. And so you can run into problems there, right? Because um they don't communicate when they need alone time, or they have some strong emotions like sensitive people do, but they become overwhelmed by those emotions and, again, can't communicate to that other person. So it's for me, I value someone being able to communicate. If you need some alone time, that's fine with me. I will understand that probably more than anyone else on the planet. I understand the need for alone time. But if you just like disappear on me for a few days, that's not okay with me.
I think it's interesting to think about this from a cultural standpoint, us both being Minnesotans,
Yes.
because I think that the directness, I think, is not necessarily, I didn't grow up with being able to be direct with my needs.
Oh, me neither. It's something I'm trying to learn now as an adult to do.
But like what is the harm in telling someone like, oh, I need some alone time?
Right, right. I mean, yeah, how many people are gonna be like, "No, you have
No.
to." Absolutely not. You have to come and hang out with me against your will, right? Like most people will be understanding if you're direct about it.
I also think there's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, that I want people to want to be with me. Like, I don't
Mhm.
want people to
Mhm.
be with me out of a certain amount of obligation.
Oh, yeah,
And
me too.
I don't know why that's just really, I don't want anyone to come just because they feel a sense of duty for it. I want them to be
Yeah,
like
yeah,
excited to see me. And I feel like
yeah.
if you aren't honest, it sort of leads towards doing things maybe because you feel a certain social, and I'm not saying accountability is bad by any means. Like, I think we should be accountable for each other, and
Yeah,
maybe
for sure.
sometimes I
There's a
like don't want to
balance.
do laundry, but I still should probably do laundry for my child. I don't know why that came up. um
Are you
anyway,
dreading doing your laundry today?
uh how did you guess? uh
Just a hunch.
I think that as being like caring for someone else, I think there's always, I think it's tricky. I don't always show up with like I really want to be with you at all
Mm.
times with my
Oh,
daughter,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
uh,
Mhm. Yeah, I get that, right? Yeah. I
even
for
though
me,
I want
I've
to.
been Oh, yeah, me too. I mean, my kiddo and I were at the playground last night, and he was like, "Want me to come down the slide with him and chase him around?" And I'm just like, "Oh, can I just sit here while you play?" Right? It's because it's a lot, right? I've come to see parenting as holding space for someone else. It's just like constantly holding space for someone else, and you love it, but it's hard too. It gets tiring. Also,
Well,
full
thank you.
disclosure, my laundry has been sitting in the dryer since last night. So it's yeah, we're on the same page about laundry.
uh I don't know how people, I feel, again, this is potentially, it alludes to my intense privilege. I don't know how people with kids don't have laundry machines
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I have
or
no
washing
idea either.
machines,
I have no
uh
idea either. No, I
or
that would be really hard.
yeah, or a dishwasher for
Yeah. Yes.
sanitizing everything. It was just crazy.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you so much for doing this interview. The book is sensitive. It's out now. Go to Introvert Dear, right?
Yes. Introvertdear.com, like you're writing a letter.
But I'll put the link to the book. Thank you so much for talking about what it means to be sensitive and for writing this book. I felt really seen and understood and also proud, and less alone in sort of ways that I had already or always told myself that I was just too much or having too many big feelings. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. Thank you so much, Jenn, for doing also this interview and for showing up, even though there was a little bit of hesitation on your part, which I totally understand.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this was all so lovely.
Take care.